There's something genuinely remarkable happening in Formula One right now that almost nobody's talking about. And honestly, when I first dug into this, I realized we've been completely wrong about how elite athletes age at the highest levels of sport. Lewis Hamilton, who just hit 41 years old, just made a dramatic shift in his entire training philosophy that goes against everything we thought we knew about staying competitive against drivers literally half his age. And the crazy part? It's actually working. But here's what really got me thinking about this differently. If you're over 30 and you think your best athletic days are behind you, what I'm about to break down isn't just about racing. It's something way more applicable to your life, because Hamilton's approach to staying sharp and competitive reveals a blueprint that most people completely ignore. So stick around, because I'm going to walk you through exactly what changed, why it shocked the F1 paddock, and what this tells us about the real secret to sustaining peak performance when everyone expects you to fade. Now, before we go deeper, I need to be straight with you. There's something counterintuitive about what Hamilton's doing that actually contradicts the traditional wisdom that's been pushed in sports for decades, and I found evidence that several other drivers have quietly adopted similar approaches with pretty remarkable results, which makes you wonder why nobody was highlighting this earlier, right? Hamilton's been in Formula One since 2007, so we're talking about someone who's been competing at the absolute highest level for 17 years, which is honestly insane when you think about it. Most athletes, especially in sports as physically demanding as F1, they peak somewhere in their early to mid-30s, and then you start seeing the decline. Slower reflexes, longer recovery times, the whole package. But according to reports from his training team and various sports science analysts who've covered his career, Hamilton started noticing around 2023 that the traditional heavy lifting regimen that worked perfectly when he was 35 wasn't cutting it anymore. Now, this isn't some secret hidden information. He's actually discussed some of these shifts publicly. But what's fascinating is understanding the actual science and strategy behind why these changes matter so much. His previous training protocol, and I want to emphasize previous here because this is crucial to understanding the shift, involved significant strength training focused on building raw muscle mass and explosive power, which makes sense for a sport where you're experiencing lateral forces that would frankly crush most humans. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is something a lot of fitness experts I've read actually confirm. There comes a point where additional muscle mass doesn't translate to better performance in racing, and especially for someone like Hamilton, who weighs every single pound because the car regulations are so strict, he realized he was essentially working against himself. The recovery revolution that Hamilton implemented is where things really start getting compelling, because this is where the real competitive advantage lies in modern F1, honestly more than the training itself. According to various sources covering his fitness regimen, he's built essentially non-negotiable recovery protocols that include daily ice baths, and I'm talking deliberate, scheduled ice immersion sessions, not just a quick plunge, combined with stretching routines that take up a serious chunk of his daily schedule. Now, I was skeptical about this when I first read it, because ice baths have become kind of trendy and overhyped in fitness culture. But what the research actually shows, and what Hamilton's adapting to, is that active recovery and deliberate cool-down protocols actually accelerate muscle repair in ways that pure rest doesn't. It's not about the ice bath being magical, it's about the discipline of the recovery process itself signaling to your body that it needs to repair more efficiently. His team has reportedly integrated cryotherapy sessions, though exact details aren't officially confirmed, and thermal contrast training, where he's going between heat and cold exposure to enhance circulation and reduce inflammation. And here's the thing that really caught my attention. This kind of recovery focus isn't just about feeling better the next day, it's fundamentally changing his training capacity, because better recovery means he can push harder in the actual workout windows without the typical burnout that comes with age. The actual workout transformation is probably more surprising than you'd think, because it completely goes against the old-school bodybuilding mentality of more volume equals more gains. According to reports from fitness professionals who've analyzed his shift, Hamilton moved dramatically away from traditional heavy resistance training in favor of what's essentially a hybrid approach, combining Pilates, yoga, and high-intensity interval training, but with a completely different intention than just burning calories. The Pilates component, and I found this genuinely interesting, focuses on deep core stability and joint stability, basically reinforcing the small stabilizer muscles around his hips, knees, and shoulders that experience tremendous stress during a 2-hour Grand Prix. These aren't muscles that show up on Instagram, but they're literally the difference between feeling pain and performing clean throughout a race weekend.
His yoga practice, which sources indicate has become a daily, non-negotiable commitment, isn't about flexibility for the sake of flexibility, though obviously that matters. It's about maintaining functional range of motion while building endurance in stretched positions, which actually translates directly to maintaining consistent posture and control during those brutal 90-minute races where your entire body's being thrown around at multiple Gs. Now, the HIIT component is where it gets tactical, because instead of grinding out long, steady-state cardio sessions that would deplete muscle fibers and create joint stress, he's shifting towards explosive interval work that maintains cardiovascular capacity while preserving muscle tissue. What's absolutely fascinating about the cardio piece, and honestly, this was counterintuitive to me when I researched it, is that Hamilton still maintains what sources describe as daily running, specifically 6 to 8 miles a day. But the strategic difference here is crucial. This isn't about trying to build an endurance base or burning maximum calories. It's about maintaining leanness,
while keeping his cardiovascular system operating at peak capacity without the systemic stress that comes with heavier training. The psychology here is honestly brilliant because running at a sustainable pace, which is what 6 to 8 miles at consistent effort would be, actually allows for active recovery while delivering cardiovascular benefits. You're staying lean, your heart's getting stronger, but you're not creating the muscle breakdown that comes with high-intensity endurance efforts. Think about it from a practical standpoint. Hamilton needs to stay incredibly light for the car regulations, but he also needs cardiovascular endurance that surpasses drivers 10 or even 15 years younger. This approach checks both boxes simultaneously. The interesting tension I'm noticing, and what makes this approach so smart from a longevity perspective, is that traditional coaching wisdom says you can't build strength and maintain leanness at the same time. But by shifting the type of strength work and recovery approach, Hamilton's actually cracking that code. Here's where the competitive context really matters, and I think this is what a lot of casual F1 fans miss. Hamilton isn't competing against drivers his age. He's competing against Lando Norris, George Russell, and Max Verstappen, guys who are in their mid-20s and early 30s, operating at their genetic peak with recovery advantages that age simply gives you. Natural recovery in your 20s is objectively faster. You can push harder and bounce back quicker because your body's just more efficient at cellular repair. So when Hamilton's adapting his approach, he's not trying to be as young as he was in 2015. That's literally impossible. He's engineering a completely different path to staying sharp and competitive. According to various reports from sports scientists and fitness analysts who follow F1, this approach has a secondary advantage that's actually really clever. It's sustainable. Traditional heavy training protocols, especially in someone past 40, create cumulative stress that builds year over year. Joint wear, connective tissue degradation, the whole cascade. But a protocol focused on mobility, stability, and strategic cardio, that's actually protective. It's strengthening the systems that degrade with age rather than accelerating that degradation. The weight management component, and this is honestly tactical genius when you understand F1 regulations, is integrated into every single choice here. The car regulations dictate a minimum weight for the driver plus car, and every single pound matters for lap time, literally. So Hamilton's training has to achieve this weird equilibrium, stay strong enough to handle the physical demands, stay mobile enough to move efficiently in the cockpit, build the endurance for a race distance, but do all of this while maintaining a weight that's competitive. The old approach of building maximum muscle mass worked when he was younger, because muscle burns calories and he had more leeway in weight. But now he's discovered that functional strength from stabilization work, deep core muscles, small stabilizer muscles, actually gives him the performance advantages he needs without the additional weight that comes from traditional hypertrophy training. It's not that he's gotten weak, it's that he's gotten smart about where the strength comes from. According to various sources analyzing his current fitness level, he's likely at a similar weight to his earlier career despite being significantly older, which is frankly remarkable. The mental endurance component, which I think gets overlooked in these fitness discussions, is equally important and intimately connected to the training shifts. Modern F1 isn't just physically demanding, it's mentally brutal. The concentration required, the pressure, the decision-making at 200 miles per hour. When your body's recovering more efficiently and you're not dealing with chronic joint pain or muscle soreness, your mental bandwidth is freed up. You're not thinking about how much your neck hurts or whether your knees are going to hold up for the race. You're thinking about tire strategies, track position, and overtaking opportunities. Hamilton's approach indirectly optimizes mental performance by removing the physical distractions that come with less efficient training protocols.
I found this aspect actually fascinating because it reveals that these training shifts aren't just about mechanics, it's about holistic athletic performance. Now, the question that really got me curious while researching this was, why hasn't every other older driver immediately adopted this approach? And that's where individual variation really matters. What works for Hamilton's specific physiology, his experience level, his resources, and honestly his intelligence about his own body might not be universally applicable. Some drivers might respond better to different protocols, or they might not have the same self-awareness about what's working and what's not. But according to various reports, several other drivers on the grid have quietly made similar adjustments, which suggests that this isn't just quirky Hamilton behavior. This is the future of how elite aging athletes stay competitive in high-demand sports. There's also the resource component, right? Hamilton has access to world-class sports scientists, recovery technology, and nutrition specialists that most athletes can't access. So while the principles are applicable, the execution might look different for people without those advantages. Looking at this from a broader athletic perspective, what Hamilton is doing is essentially reframing what it means to stay competitive in your 40s. He's not trying to be 25. He's not even trying to be 35. He's optimized the unique advantages that a 40-year-old body can have: experience, pattern recognition, decision-making speed, and the wisdom to not waste effort on things that don't contribute directly to performance. His brain, after 7 championships and countless races, is operating at a level of sophistication that no 25-year-old, no matter how talented, can match. By freeing his body from unnecessary training stress, he's actually amplifying the one area where age is an advantage rather than a liability. And honestly, that's a perspective shift that applies way beyond Formula One. Most people assume age means decline, but Hamilton's showing that with the right approach, age can actually mean refinement. The competitive landscape of F1 is shifted too, and I think this contextualizes why now is the moment Hamilton made these changes. The regulations were updated, the cars are different, and the level of fitness required has evolved. What worked
in 2008 isn't necessarily optimal in 2024, and it's telling that Hamilton was flexible enough to completely reimagine his training rather than just grinding with what had always worked. That adaptability, that willingness to question established approaches, might actually be his biggest competitive advantage. Not the ice baths or the Pilates, but the intellectual flexibility to change fundamental approaches when the evidence suggests it's time. According to various sources tracking his performance metrics, his qualifying pace and race consistency have actually remained competitive, which validates that these training shifts aren't sacrificing performance, they're potentially enhancing it through a different mechanism. What I found actually compelling about all this research is how it challenges conventional wisdom about aging and peak performance. We're obsessed in modern culture with fighting age, pretending like the strategies that work in your 20s should still work in your 40s, just with more intensity. But what Hamilton's demonstrating is that maybe the smarter approach is working with aging rather than against it, building training protocols that acknowledge biological reality while maximizing the specific advantages that experience and accumulated knowledge provide. It's elegant in a way, honestly. It's not dramatic, it's not flashy, but it's effective. And in a sport where milliseconds matter, that effectiveness translates directly to competitive results. The longevity question is really what underpins all of this, because Hamilton's current contract extends several years, and he's clearly positioning himself to maintain competitive performance through that entire window. This isn't a guy trying to squeeze out one last season before retirement. This is someone who's building a training protocol designed to sustain high performance over multiple years. And that distinction matters, because it means these changes aren't short-term optimizations. They're foundational shifts that he's investing in because he believes in their long-term validity. The fact that he's publicly discussed some aspects of these changes and that his team has allowed information about his regimen to become relatively well-known suggests confidence that this approach is sound and sustainable. Looking forward, what's interesting to consider is whether this becomes the new standard in F1 for older drivers, or whether it remains somewhat specific to Hamilton's unique situation. Will we see drivers making these kinds of shifts earlier in their careers, using this as a preventative framework rather than a reactive adjustment? The younger drivers on the grid right now, they're watching what Hamilton's doing, and if he continues being competitive, that's going to influence how they approach their own training as they age. There's a ripple effect that starts with one athlete doing something differently and working, then spreading throughout the sport.
That's historically how training evolution happens in competitive athletics. Someone questions the established approach, tries something different, proves it works, and then everyone adjusts. Personally, what I found genuinely impressive about this situation is the intellectual honesty required to walk away from something that worked for your entire career. Hamilton had dominance in the 2010s using traditional training methods. He could have just said, well, this approach got me 8 championships and stuck with it. But he didn't. He recognized that what got you to the peak isn't necessarily what keeps you competitive after age 40. That requires self-awareness and intellectual flexibility that honestly isn't common even among elite performers. Most people get attached to what worked historically and can't adjust when circumstances change. Hamilton's showing the ability to evolve, and in competitive sports, that evolution often matters more than the specific methods you're using. It's like the training methods themselves are tactical details, but the strategic thinking, recognizing when fundamental change is necessary and having the courage to implement it, that's the real advantage. The science behind why these specific changes work is rooted in some pretty solid physiology. Recovery capacity genuinely decreases with age, not because of some mystical decline, but because the cellular machinery that handles repair gets less efficient. So prioritizing recovery protocols isn't optional for an older athlete, it's foundational. Joint stability becomes more important when connective tissue loses some of its structural resilience, so Pilates and yoga focused on stabilizer muscles genuinely becomes more valuable than traditional hypertrophy work. And cardiovascular fitness through steady-state running preserves leanness while building endurance because you're hitting that sweet spot of energy expenditure without triggering muscle breakdown. These aren't revolutionary ideas. Sports scientists have been discussing this stuff for years, but seeing them implemented at the absolute highest levels of competition by one of the most accomplished athletes in history validates that this approach has serious merit. It's one thing to read about a training concept in a sports science paper. It's another to see it working with someone competing against the absolute best drivers in the world. I think the takeaway that matters most, and this is what I genuinely believe about this whole situation, is that Hamilton's approach demonstrates that peak performance in your 40s is genuinely achievable with the right training philosophy. It's not about doing everything harder, it's about doing everything smarter. It's about understanding your body well enough to know what's going to generate returns on investment and what's going to generate accumulated damage. It's about building systems that are protective rather than destructive, sustainable rather than explosive. And honestly, that applies whether you're a professional racing driver or you're someone in your 40s who wants to stay healthy and fit without burning out. The specific methods might be different. Most people don't have access to cryotherapy or personal sports scientists, but the principles are universal. Prioritize recovery, focus on stability and mobility alongside strength, maintain lean muscle through efficient training, and approach your athletic life with evolving intelligence rather than rigid adherence to what worked historically. That's genuinely impressive, and it's something worth paying attention to, not just from a racing perspective, but from a broader athletic and human performance.